Recording. Let me try that
small.
again. I apologise for that. Right, hello sir, how are you?
Very well, thanks, Morvin. How are you?
Good. It's nice to get you on here and chat about the Mylechreest music department and just have a general chat and see how it goes. But thank you for volunteering your mad self to take part in this ludicrous experiment that I seem to be landed with. I think
no, Morvin.
we should
Morvin, thank you so much for doing it. It's been wonderful to hear from other people from around the world, and it's great to have a chat like this. So thank you, Morvin.
Well, as you've already alluded to, this is just a day after my birthday, but we do share a very dubious link, having been born in the same hospital in Ipswich many years ago. Your parents were the commanding officers at Felixstowe, I believe, at the time.
Yeah, that's correct.
Married. So, how long did you spend it? What are your memories of Felixstowe? Do you have any memories or not?
I have a terrible memory. No, I know I was there for a few very formative early years, but no, it's been quite a while.
It happens to the best of us. So, yeah, I mean, I've been looking through the list. If I can get the list up, it might even work better. You've got some pretty interesting things in your collection, and some of them I've even heard of. I mean, I was looking at my list yesterday, and Higgs, Exalted, Boundless, and Awesome God came back on the collection. So when did you develop the taste for putting musical notes on paper, and what was the first sort of jottings that came into your life?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's a it's a bit of an interesting story, really.
We love interesting stories.
So I'm an officer's kid, so we moved around a lot, and one move was when we moved back from Australia, back to England, down to Bournemouth, and I started in a new school, and I had never done French before, but I was told to go to French class, and of course I tried not to go to French class as much as possible.
I missed out on that.
So believe it or not, I was able to skip out on French for about a term because I went to the library instead. And whilst I was at the library, I was exploring through the computer, as everyone does, and I was looking, and I found the program Sibelius, which I know a lot of our friends use. Yeah, the school had a version of it, and it was during year 9 French class that I started learning how to use Sibelius, and it was a great tool to just put some things down, and you could hear it back straight away. And so for the best part of a semester, and until they caught me and told me I had to go to French class, I learned how to use Sibelius, and I started there.
So do you sort of still use the pen and paper method when you get an idea? I mean, if you're walking out in town and in your life, and or you're a mobile phone guy and just got to get this jingle down before I forget it. What's the start of the process when if you have an idea that comes to you?
Absolutely. So if it's out and about, I'll just quickly open up my phone and just make a quick voice memo, something like that. I'm increasingly trying to get better at using pen and paper, but I'm certainly one who, I think, having started with Sibelius, I've found it such a useful tool, but trying not to rely on it as a crutch and just using it as a tool, I think is the way to use it. But typically it would go, I'd be jotting some things down, have a go at the piano, see what I can, see if I can get what's up here, down here, and then from here, then typing it into the computer or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, anybody who knows you well enough, and although we sort of grew up together in neighbouring chords, I'm obviously more familiar with your mother through the New Horizons and stuff, so I know you come from a very musical family. So was it something that you had at home when you were growing up? Was this emphasis on music in the household? Being exposed to different kinds of music?
Yeah, so great question. So the family, we've always had classical music has always been something that we've always had. We had a great CD which I think I stole from mum and dad, classical commercials, and it was all classical music which was really familiar to people. And I remember listening to a lot of classical music, um, and then Broadway shows and musicals, that sort of thing. My dad loves music, but it's not his strong suit. He would say himself that he can't carry a tune. But mum is quite musical,
That's
and so she
nice.
was
Yeah.
she was an excellent cornet player, and she helped teach me piano and all those sort of things. But again, being a kid, you never want to listen to your parents. So it was mum would. It used to annoy me that mum knew how to play the cornet, because I'd come home and I'd be trying to do it, and she knew the fingerings, all that sort of stuff, and it just used to really got on my nerves. So literally one week, I went to YP band, and I came home and I had a trombone instead, because I knew she didn't know how to play it, and I've never
Ah.
looked back since. So it's always, yeah.
So, what's the first piece of music you remember writing that got performed outside of your own four walls in your own computer?
Ooh, good question. Um, the very first piece was a piece I did for my school school music class. It's called "The Bold Knight," and it had two chords in it, but it had a nice tune. And I've not revisited that one in a while, but seeing some of these questions has helped me remember that one. The first piece that got performed out, I suppose, um, I think would have been a piece which again I wrote for my school education for doing GCSEs at the time. But I had the bonus of having a brass band at Boscombe, or at least having
Yes, very good
players
one.
who could play brass instruments. So I printed out a piece which was called Vincero, is what it was called. It was a Gaelic piece, like a festival opener, that sort of thing. I wrote it for school, but printed it out and took it to the army. And a couple of members of the YP band were kind enough to stay with me after YP band, after we'd played football and all those sort of things, and they recorded it for me. So that was a really great experience.
Yeah, it must have been really interesting being there, because that play, Boscombe is very, very imaginative and magical from a Salvation Army point of view, isn't it? And a
Oh,
lot of
absolutely.
you get a lot of visitors pass through there. Um, Obviously, you've got a lot of work that's in the filing cabinet that gets written prior to the publication of pieces. I remember Easter Jubilation coming on the stands, and it was nothing like we'd ever heard of before. And I suddenly saw the name. I thought, I wonder if that's who I think it is. But
I mean, that is one thing that helps with my last name, is that there aren't many of us, Mylechreest. So you're pretty sure if you see it, it's one of us. But yeah, I was very blessed to have grown up in a few really excellent. I mean, so many great people and great teachers around. But in Australia, we were at Camberwell Corps,
really, wow,
Camberwell, which was
lovely
an
place.
incredible one to grow up with. My wifey band leader, Dean Gosling, who is an excellent. He's the soprano player for the Melbourne Staff Band. And at the same time, there we also had all sorts of members from the Melbourne Staff Band there. Trevor Davis was there. He was one of the first people who gave me a trombone lesson, actually. So that was an amazing thing to start with there. And then when we moved back to Boscombe, um, at the time, Howard Evans, the bandmaster, so much to learn from
Yeah,
him. And Darren Bartlett was the songster leader. Two huge names in the Salvation Army lexicon of music, who were very gracious with their time and really helpful to learn from, both just sitting in rehearsals and in some personal time with them as well. So
yeah.
very, very fortunate.
That must have been a real buzz to have these people around you. I guess that this answers one of the questions in your mentorship, that you had all these legends around, and they were, willing to sit down and sort of talk through, but not in a critical way. I would imagine they were sort of being the encouragers, and sort of
Oh,
and going through and saying, do you know what, this doesn't quite, let's try it this way, rather than, now you can't do that.
very much so. Yeah, so some great opportunities with some great people there, and even like core pianists who would have a look at it. So Vidya, who would have a look at some of my stuff for me, or Mrs. Meredith, who would look at some piano stuff for me. So great. I remember once printing out a piece to get Howard to look at it, and just the most basic thing was that I had ended up printing it out on something like 87 pages, whereas it really could have been done on 4.
Yeah.
And he was so gracious just to say, oh, wait, here's something, here's how you can change this. Look at your key, make sure that just because if you can play in D major on the piano, that's great. But suddenly when you put that into brass band and the horns are playing in E major, A major, you've got all of this changes of stuff, having to think about that as well. So yeah, it was really fortunate to have had some great people along the way. And when I was doing my work experience, which is in the UK, we do when we're 14, 15.
Yep.
I went up to music editorial up in London.
Oh, you lucky person.
I know, it was great. And at the time, if I can get it right, it would have been, so Dr. Cobb was there, but we had Andrew Blythe, Dean Jones, Paul Sharman, Simon, Simon
Burkett?
Goff. Simon Burkett was there. Oh, Simon Burkett. He was a great help, as well as Simon Goff. Derek Kane was there at the time.
Just some of the top names in the field. Really.
Top names, and I'm definitely
like
missing
a sponge, really, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, even Ken Downey, he came up once or twice, and I was able to spend some time with him. It's that sort of stuff, which I think at the time I didn't realize quite how much of an exposure to great musical talent and how to use it as much as I could have done. But just being surrounded by these things and great encouragers along the way has been such a blessing.
Yeah, it must have been really pleasing to just be in a situation where you can just sponge off and learn, and you're not sort of deliberately trying to nick the ideas, but you're just trying to learn from these people who've been in it before and just pick up and say, look, I don't want to mimic you, but it helps to build up my own personal thing and better myself, which is what a part of work experience is, to improve yourself through learning. So
absolutely, and that was a great experience.
I know you've got some a couple of Unity series stuffs, and I really nice surprise because I wouldn't have put it down to you, but I don't know why. But He Knows My Name in Maple Leaf Bath, a nice trombone solo, written for Nathan Staple Hill. I think the school notes are correct. Tell us a bit about He Knows My Name. I mean, I know it was a commission, but a little bit about the trombone solo.
Sure. So I'm a trombonist myself, and so it was fitting when Nathan asked me to write up something for him. And I mean, a lot of the music I've written really is far more functional than fanfare, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So a lot of the stuff I find myself writing tends to be for smaller ensembles, for Unity or for Triumph series. Again, it's a different mentality, I think, for me. I love the big stuff, and I love being able to see that, and I'm in awe of some of the amazing, huge pieces that are out there. But for me, I've found most of the time that writing for the group, the wifey band, or the younger people, or the people who don't necessarily have the superstar players, not only in some ways that's more challenging, I find, is that you're trying to keep in mind, well, let's try to make sure that the second corner is here and that they can do it. That's been something that I've been conscious of. But yeah, so I wrote this trombone solo, He Knows My Name. It's a beautiful worship song, one of my favorites. And having written that, I was then, I submitted that and was then asked to write up a scripture-based song, which is one of Andrew Blythe's great things, that he is a wonderful encourager for so many, but particularly he has been for me. But one of his great tools is a scripture-based song series, which he's been able to give out to people who are still developing and still learning. And we all still learning, but I definitely am. So I took that one and was able to make that into a congregational song. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, Dale, but I'm nicking your SA Music Index for this because I think it's just a great resource. And you've got some really nice arrangements in the scripture-based song that you've managed to do. All things of our God and King, I will dance, I will sing, praise is rising. And do you find it I mean, this question may sound a bit odd. Do you find it easier to scripture base in the arrangement that scripture base provides to use some of these modern contemporary songs? Is that easier, or is it more challenging than what most of us would perceive is a traditional tune from the tune book, like St Clement's or Reishi or Men of Harlech? From a composing arranging point of view, is there a difference?
Good question. Just before I get onto that, let me just shout out Dale again. Dale, who did the SA Music Index. He's from Romford Core, which is where I went for a few years. We were there together, and I'm so glad. I was actually the first person, I believe, other than Dale. Dale had compiled this index, and he showed it to me one Sunday morning, and I told him it was just incredible, and it blew my mind that we had something like that.
Yeah.
And so
I've been
just with some encouragement, I told him he needed to share it everywhere with everybody, and I'm so glad to see how successful it's been. It's a great tool, and Dale is a wonderful guy and so humble. So it's an amazing asset, which the whole SA music world is now using. So anyway, just thank you to Dale for that one. As far as arranging, I suppose if you're trying to arrange something that is more traditional, there's certain expectations of the tune, and there's certain parameters which it's very hard to not go down. So, for instance, in the Hallelujah Chorus series, I did an arrangement of Alleluia. How does the rest of the song go? All Creatures of Our God and King. All Creatures of Our God and King. Classic song. And I found it really difficult to try to work out how I could bring something new to it, but keep it so recognizable. Because I mean, some of those chord sequences and things, like you're expecting to hear this right here, and if there's an interesting balancing act between giving people what they expect and giving them something new. And I think if you're just trying to do something new all the time, you lose some of the beauty that you have in these traditional tunes. Which is then really helpful using some of the other ones. Honored Christian Soldiers is another arrangement. That one's, I allowed myself to get a little bit funky with the harmony once or twice. So if anybody's used that, I hope that's an interesting one. And then, of course, then you have the modern worship songs, which are great. There's some beautiful songs out there. Harmonically, they're a lot simpler, which, again, in some ways can help when you're trying to arrange something. But again, if you're not careful, it just ends up being chord 1, chord 4, chord 5, chord 1. It can be very basic harmonically. So it's a really interesting one. I quite enjoy it. You know what? Anything. If you throw me something, I would love to give it a go. I think that's the attitude of most of us SA composers.
So originality is very important to you, because it's very interesting, and I think I've asked this question every time, that if you're asked to do a hymn tune arrangement or a scripture-based arrangement, whether it's a well-known tune or a very obscure tune that has sort of reanimated itself, you've still got to keep the essence of it and not fall into the trap of being a Hiram, Stedman Allen, James Kerno clone.
Absolutely.
You've got to go back to, I mean, you talk about Onward Christian Soldiers, it's probably one of the most famous hymns there is out there. It must have been a daunting project when they come, how do I make that original? I mean, as a composer, does that challenge you as a composer? I mean, does that get the blood pacing to say, I've got to try and meet this head on?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the great things with that project actually was I was asked, so I work out here in New York, and I was asked to write a new arrangement of Honored Christian Soldiers for our commissioning weekend for all of our candidates who were going off to training. They were going to walk down, and so knowing that was certainly a big help when I was trying to work out how it should sound, how to arrange it, knowing that Have I lost you?
No, you haven't. So there's the arranging, as we were saying.
Yeah, so specifically for Honored Christian Soldiers, I was given a task of writing that one for our commissioning weekend in Greater New York. We had candidates who were going off to training, and so we wanted to write something for them as they were walking down with the flags, all that sort of stuff. So it certainly helped when I was arranging such a well-known hymn tune, trying to work out how to get the emotions going, how to make it feel kind of like a fanfare, militaristic, all that sort of stuff. because I think there's nothing more daunting for a composer than a blank canvas. I think it's the scariest thing in the world is when if you've just got nothing, it's completely open. It's just so hard to know, certainly for me, where to start, because when everything is a possibility, it, it just boggles the mind. And so actually, I often find having parameters really helps. So if someone asks me, oh, could you write us a piece of music? Sure. Tell me what you want. Is it 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Is it for this size ensemble or this size ensemble? Do you have a hymn tune you want? Do you know the tunes you want? Do you know the style you want?
No,
all
you
those sort of things. But yeah, all those sort of things are just helping bring it from this huge white canvas to a shape or a mold for you to fit in. And then, of course, then you come to originality, which is such a interesting part of it. I still feel like I'm trying to find my voice from a composition point of view.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you mentioned some of these names, Himes and Kernau and like Len Valentine. If you hear a piano accompaniment, you know it's Len Valentine, or you can recognize some of these composers just like straight away. And that's an amazing thing. Peter Graham, for instance, he's another one where any of his pieces, you can recognize it almost straight away as a Peter Graham one. I'm not sure I've found mine yet, but that's part of the joy and the experiences.
It's a learning experience, isn't it? But
absolutely.
One of the questions is the biggest lessons you've learned. You still learn. You never stop.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Not a composer myself.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is why I'm asking the questions. I mean, you might say that you're at the sort of the echelons of your career rather than the twilight.
Sure. I mean,
you're still on the start of this musical journey.
Absolutely. I would hope that I continue to learn and continue to grow. One of the most daunting things I found with music is just how much music is out there.
Yeah.
I mean, if I wanted to, I could be listening to a new piece of music every hour for every day of the rest of my life. And that could just be studying the works of Bach. I mean, that Bach, for instance, terrifies me because I feel as a composer now, 300, 400 years later, can I say anything that Bach wasn't able to back then? His music is just transcendent for me. And his use of harmony and melody is just incredible. And then from Bach, then you get to Mozart and Beethoven and Tchaikovsky and Copland and Glass and all these amazing composers who continue to build on each other. And then there's me, and I can find that really hard to know what my place is in it and can I bring anything new to the table. So I certainly don't think I'm a learned person at all, and it's definitely growing day by day. This pandemic has given me this.
Look at your. I mean, you've got a fair bit published, and it's right across the spectrum. I mean, you're not sort of being pigeon. I use the case. You're not doing a Bramwell Coles. You're not sort of pigeoning yourself in the March spectrum. I mean, Locus East, a very simple arrangement of a classic tune. You don't overblow it. It's not tarted around like some kind of fireworks. It just is there. I mean, I remember it on the band practice. I'd never even heard of it before. I had to go away and learn it and find the source material, which I find fascinating. And
yeah, absolutely.
It's some of these things you come out. Awesome God, another piece I didn't realise was played. We were talking just before about Boundless. I didn't know whether that had been written for the 2015 Congress, because anyone who wrote for the Congress in 2015 seemed to have put Boundless in it. But yeah, again, that's a selection that's got some really nice tunes in it. And for someone of your youngness, let's say, that's quite developed. I mean, how did Boundless come about?
Oh, well, so Boundless was a college project at the time where we were asked to write something, an extended piece, and that was at the time working through writing for brass band, using Boundless as the main hymn, and then looking at a set of variations on it, but each variation being a continuation of the lyrics that you find. Because for me, that's one of the most beautiful things that we have in the armies, our lyrics and our. I mean, we have such a wealth of music. We are so spoiled. And again, I don't think we realize it. It's when I tell some of my non-Salvation Army friends some of the experiences I've had and some of the music that we have and that we listen to.
Yeah.
We are so blessed by how much music we have. Yeah. So yeah, Boundless was a project looking to try to tell tell the story of each of those verses musically. So considering how each one made me feel at the time, and trying to reflect each verse as it came through. And I was fortunate enough to have that one published outside of the army. That one came through Lake Music Publications. But again, we're so fortunate with the army music, and just so much classical music which we have, which has been transcribed and given to us, and the army has used. And I think it's great that there's so much out there for us to continue to learn and discover. And just during, I mean, this whole pandemic, this is a nightmare for everybody. But I've been trying as much as I can to use it as a time to do more reading and more listening and more studying. And the writing output, I need to get myself back onto that treadmill. But certainly for right now, it's been a great chance to just reflect on some music, some words, and to continue studying, because it's a process. There's certainly no end, I don't think.
It's interesting because when we moved to electronics and OHP projections some years ago, we had to go from a point of what we had electronically and what we didn't. And I remember sitting down with my father for the course of probably 3 or 4 months and going through every single song and tune in the songbook and the tune book. And it was an eye-opener. I mean, we all know our favourites. We all know 763 is that one and 274 is that one. We know our favourite tune is that one. And we know which ones we don't like and the ones that we hopefully never will listen to again. It's the ones in the cracks that I found fascinating. It was like, oh my goodness, we've actually got that in the songbook. I mean, I've said before, I think, 2 composers lyricists that gets me is Sidney Cox, because I think every one of his songs is just a personal. I mean, every song is a testimony of kind, or is a story. But with him, I really feel that it's just, you could do an open air and you could read out as a personal testimony. And for music, I adore Phil Catlin. I really wish that there was more out there, because I think Stedman Allen's been quoted as saying that he's been kind of under the shadow of Eric Ball because they were kind of contemporaries.
Yeah.
And it's something I think Neil's brought up, that you get a lot of repeaters in the Salvation Army, don't you? Particularly recordings. And you get a lot of big hitters. And it's the music that falls between the cracks. It may not be that Royal Albert Hall equivalent that doesn't get used progressively. So, I mean, what was the last piece of army music that you listened to that really moved you, and why?
Well, just touching on that point, Morvin, that's been one of the things, having served as a YP band leader and having served as a bandmaster, and now in my current position, I'm the core pianist, which the poor folks at New York Temple, I don't think they know quite how bad I am, but that's been something that I've been developing. But there's so much music, and it honestly is incredible. It boggles my mind. If you look at a typical sheet that comes out, there might be one piece out of 4 that everyone knows. I mean, Guardian of My Soul, for instance, incredible piece by Darren. It's beautiful, it's stunning. That's 1 out of 4 pieces that came out in that one publication, that one session, that one time. We have cabinets and cabinets full of music which we just don't know and we don't discover. And that's where my frustration comes with that, I suppose. Like Kingdom Triumphant, which I love, is a wonderful piece. Do we need another recording of Kingdom Triumphant when we have so many excellent recordings, don't get me wrong, but when there's so much other music which we just don't even know, we haven't even touched yet? That's certainly something which again, I just think we've been so blessed in the Salvation Army to have so much music and so many composers who have given so much. I just feel like such a small part of that, and trying to develop. As for a essay piece recently, the New York Staff Band have been working on, Ray Stedman Allen. Talk me through his big one. It's not
Lord is King.
Lord is King. There we go. Lord is King. That Lord is King. You got it in one. Well done.
Okay. Yeah.
Again. I mean, there's another name. Ray Stedman Allen. Like, how many incredible pieces of his that you can think of, but let alone, but then there's so many which are just in the journals, which are just hiding away, which I don't think we're touching, and I think that's such a shame. But they've been working on The Lord is King, and I was able to spend some time with Professor David King, who has been working with them, and just spending time with him and spending time and being able to hear the staff band play through some of that music. His art, Racerman's artistry and technique and knowledge of the brass band and knowledge of the sounds that he wanted, just an incredible piece. And then recently I've been going through a lot of the songster music that I sang in my adolescence and growing up, going back through some of those things from that time. And I think there's something special about music that we sing and perform and develop as we're growing, and then in times like this to go back and revisit some of those, and particularly the stuff that you may not have realized quite how meaningful they were, or coming at it with a new light. The one for me recently has been Behold the Tabernacle of God, which is Len Valentine's incredible choral work. It's a 8 minutes, 9 minutes. It's a beautiful, stunning piece, which if anyone isn't familiar with, I would heavily recommend. This again, we're so spoiled with our music. Just to pick one or two is impossible.
No, it's interesting to hear you say that. I mean, you're obviously at the start of your journey. So obviously the names you've mentioned are people who are just legends in your mind, and that you follow at their footsteps of. So what are the musical differences between the UK and the US in your current position that you've learned and you've had to absorb and change how you do things? Have you had to sort of do any kind of serious kind of block thinking and say, oh no, that's different, I've got to adapt it for maybe a United States audience? Is there any difference?
Sure. So for anyone who isn't aware, so I currently work for the Salvation Army out here in America, out in New York City, where I work in the Salvation Army department, in the music department, teaching kids around the New York City area, which has been a real blessing for the past 4 years. Musically, over here, one of the things that they do really well is that they grade their music in such a way that you can tell what level a band is at. Now, surprisingly, they don't do musical grades like they do in the UK, your ABRSM, grade 1, grade 8, all that sort of stuff. But here they have very strict protocols for what can and can't be included in publications. So for instance, the American Band Journal, which is the one that the USA East do with Dorothy Gates, is the music editor for that. Yep. It can be, although there are 13, she'll tell me I'm forgetting this wrong, there are 13 parts, it can be played with just 7. And so part of that is that each line, you have to think about where you're doubling things and where a part is optional or where a part is key. So for instance, in that one, you can play it with first cornet, second cornet, first horn, second horn, and 3 trombones, and then bass. So it's 8, I think, that you have to have. And then there's optional euphonium, optional baritone, optional flugel, optional soprano, all these options, which suddenly it means that these pieces, which are big and expanded, can actually be played by a much smaller group. And that's a really good practice when you're writing. It almost makes it feel more like a Sudoku puzzle, where you're trying to piece it together, but also looking at the constraints and looking at, right, well, this part has the third, then I don't need to waste the third on this part over here, or where should the root be and where should the fifth? And it just turns it into a game, really. And then also down south, they have the American Instrumental Ensemble Series, AIES, yes. Which is an excellent series because, again, it can be done with 4 parts.
Yeah.
But it can be expanded up to 5 or 6, and they have versions for wind band and strings and oboe and just all of these options. And there are 4 grades, and each grade is very, very specific about how it can be written for.
Yeah.
So grade 1, you can only go from a C to a C or whatever it is, and then it expands slightly and expands and expands, which means as a bandmaster, when I'm looking at my group and I'm looking around at beginners, maybe I can do this one, and then I'll advance them up to this one, and then you think about it that way. And I
It's,
think that's something that
yeah,
the Americans do really well.
it's nice because a few years ago I stumbled across the AIES series as some demos. I think I think 90% of them are now online. And what is interesting from my point of view as a listener is that some of the pieces are not meant to be blow your brains out. And it's almost as if their simplicity is what's good about them. They said they're not aiming to be the soprano cornet player in Carnegie Hall. You know, it's for whoever wants to have a grab at it. You can have 70-year-olds come in and say, look, I'm just picking up an instrument, I've retired, I want a new challenge. You know, it's for someone who wants to start at the basics and work up. And you've got all these composers who, you know, just have this ability to say, look, 3 cornets and a euphonium. And then next week we might have another euphonium or a trombone, and you build up and build up. You mentioned learning in Sibelius. Now, one of the questions I would like to ask is, bearing in mind that you like writing for small ensembles and groups, because that's your day-to-day reality, when does, you know, if you've got a commission coming or you've got that God-inspired moment, how do you lock in to the fact that you say, okay, I could blow this out, you know, Sibelius gives me the chance to ISB it, to New York Staff Band it, rather than the 8 players at, you know, New York Temple. How do you cope with the ability to not blow it out musically when you've got to write? Does it depend on who you're writing for? Or how do you cope with the temptation not to balloon it out if you want to?
Good question. And again, just going back slightly, I think everything you're saying is so correct, because I think the Americans really, the series that they produce are really focused on that education and that building blocks. And some amazing composers have written for these series and really use those constraints to work on it. When writing, if someone's asked me to do something, I'll often ask, well, can you tell me something about the group? Can you tell me, have you got a strong section? Is there somebody who I should maybe leave the semiquavers away from, that sort of thing? But for me, like I say, my date.
Well, hang on. What do you mean by semiquavers?
Semiquavers? Oh, what would I say? I would say 16th notes, wouldn't I? That's one thing that I don't miss about England. I enjoy my minims, crotchets, and quavers. Here it's quarter, half, 16s, and I always get it wrong somewhere. But for me, it's trying to make things as functional as possible, so that if I give this to somebody, they can play it straight away. And unless it's been asked specifically for, can you do something like this? I would far rather be able to give somebody something that is simple and straightforward, because if what we're looking to do is give people a message, then part of it is that I don't want to put an obstacle in the way of it. And if that obstacle is it being too hard, or they're being too high, or it's too long, or it hurts too much to play, then whatever my message is being hidden by that. Whereas if I can try to get rid of as much of that as I can, and then the message, whatever it is clearer for the performer. If it's clearer for the performer, it will be clearer for the audience. And if it's clearer for the audience, then I'm doing my job. Yeah, I suppose that's one way to think about it.
Yeah, I find it very interesting because as a composer, particularly, I mean, outside of commissions coming in, and outside of the fact that your local core band says we're going to do this concert, can we have a piece, a jingle, whatever, you've still got those Mylechreest originals that come through, and I always find it fascinating to say you've got the whole toolbox that these music notation softwares allow you, so you can write ad infinitum to 101 different parts if you wanted to. But the reality is you've got to keep a control of that to say, you know, I can write the present age, you know, if I have time for it. You know, if you're locked up, you say, right, this is the time I've had that idea on the brain, I've had the Les Condon, it's got to come out. How big how massive does this go out? I mean, how do you stop the music from running away from you?
Another great point. And I'm definitely still learning how to do that. But here in America, we have the North American Composers Forum, which happens every 2 years, and a chance to sit down with some amazing people. So this we just had it in January, and we had Bill Himes was there, Bill we had Stephen Buller, we had Dorothy Gates, we had Nick Zimmer Smith, we had some amazing people, and it was able to sit down with Bill was when I did it. And his big thing, which I think is so key, is every single thing that you put on that page has to have a reason and a place. You have to be able to justify every note, every dynamic, every articulation. And if you can't justify it, why is it there? If I'm putting this here and it's here and it's here, maybe I can reconfigure it. Maybe I can change it up. And if you look at some of his scores, Bill Himes, his scores are so clean. And you can see where every melody line, and you can see what every function of every single note, both this way, vertically and horizontally is. Like, you can see the lines and you can also see the harmony, and it's so stunning. And I think that's something that I'm still learning how to do, trying to think both horizontally and vertically with my scores. It is a challenge because, again, Sibelius can play anything. It's the best band you will ever have, because they'll always play it right and it'll be perfect every time, and no one's going to complain about it. But having done one or two pieces on Sibelius and then giving them to a real life band, or even, you can suddenly see the difference. And particularly if there's once or twice where I've led a piece which I have written, and suddenly I hear it in real life for the first time, and I can see, well, Ed, you silly fool, like look, like this part is too hard, or this part just doesn't make sense, or those leaps are just silly. And that's something that I think comes with time, and you're just honing it over and over and over again. But yeah, Sibelius is a tool. It shouldn't be the whole. I'm never aiming to write for Sibelius. I'm aiming to write for John and Jane and Jill, who are sat in a core somewhere, or whoever's going to play the music. I'm writing for them, and Sibelius isn't my goal.
No, that's interesting, because as a composer, I would guess there is a temptation to say, you've got an idea, and in your own brain, if it's outside of a commission or for the local core band, there's no limits to how big you can get it. But in the same time, you've got to have that realism of time and effect to say, if you're going to go away for 2 months and you're on the beach at Malibu or something, you can experiment, and you can do that variation thing you've been thinking of, or that hymn tune comes in. So,
but I mean, just with that, I mean, if for instance, there's one or two bigger pieces which I've written, which it's great to hear when people play those. But some of the smaller ones that I've written have had so much more life and expectancy than I would ever have expected. Easter Jubilation, which is that Easter themed unity song, I was probably get a message, at least two or three messages every year at Easter from someone from somewhere around the world who I've never met, who I would never have heard of, who say, oh, we played that at Easter. Or the other one for me is, I did a singing company song called Siaku Du Misa, which is slow, simple, it's a lullaby. And again, that stuff, I hear people play it and I hear people sing it and I get messages from people. I'm so glad that we were able to do that. And from my perspective as a composer, the goal is for people to play it and to enjoy it. And particularly as a Christian composer, as a Salvationist, I want people to enjoy that message and get something through it. So for me, if I have an option between writing something that's smaller and more constrained, but is more widely accessible, as opposed to something large and huge scale, for me, I almost feel like my duty as someone who wants to spread the message more widely is to aim in that direction.
Yeah, you've mentioned about getting. I mean, in this day and age, I suppose you had more of a benefit than the Eric Balls and the Phil Catlinets and the Stedman Allens did, of having an email from Patangulu in Australia saying, we played Locust East and it was wonderful. Thank you very much. We wanted to let you know that we got a real blessing. So it's probably impossible to answer this question, but within Army context, what's the most unusual place you've had an email from that sort of really tweaked your mind? Carlin, really? I mean, obviously anyone who sends you an email saying we've written is a blessing, but has there anything sort of really unusual that sort of stayed in the brain?
I mean, on that, if you're whoever is listening, if you enjoy a piece of music and you're able to write to the composer, always do it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a lengthy email, just a short note, because you need to know that for composers, it's an individual sport. It's like playing solitaire all the time, and you're just hoping that somebody else might enjoy it. And so when we do get a note to come in, any kind of note, it's always a blessing. So if you're listening to this and you enjoy a piece of music, just please send a note, send an email. It means a lot. For me, I've been amazed I've had some messages come from all over South America. I've had messages from Canada, from a whole host of the States. I've had messages from Africa, from Australia, from New Zealand, from India. That was a really surprising one. As far as weird places that it's been played, a few years ago, Birmingham Citadel, which is another call that I attended during my university days, there was a small group who went and visited every Premier League football stadium in 92 hours. I think it was 92 hours, 92 in 92. And I wrote a couple of the arrangements for that one, a couple of the tunes and songs which are associated with a certain place. I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles, that sort of stuff. And yeah, I was able to hear a couple of those get played. So I've been very fortunate to have been asked to write some music before, and it's always you always feel very privileged when someone asks you, particularly for me, because I always go, well, I mean, there's so many other better composers out there. There's so many better names. So the fact that you've come down to me, I'm sorry that you had to come down to me, but I'll do my best.
Wow, no, it's a privilege to have you. I mean, I've known of the family for a very long time. To be able to sit and chat music with you is indeed a privilege. I remember very well, because I remember Nicola and Co, when they were on their little minibus tour over the bank holiday weekend. I said, look, I think they were coming up from Colchester and they came up to Ipswich. I said, yeah, it's 2 minutes away from my house. Whatever, it's a bank holiday, I'll meet you. And it was at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I had the taxi all booked. And Dad, bless his socks, said, cancel the taxi. He said, it's going to be a bank holiday. We can go back to sleep. And we literally got round the corner of Ipswich Football Club, and I got a photo of them. And Nicola had said, we're now leaving, we'll be there in 10 minutes. And I said, meet you around the corner. And poor Tim said, I thought we had an axe murderer coming on, because I had my Dayglow work shirt on at 4 o'clock in the morning. And they didn't play a tune because 4 o'clock, but they literally took a photo, said a prayer, and they moved on. And then I saw them at Chelmsford a few years later when they were doing that. I think it was the rugby stadiums or something.
Yeah.
So it was a real surreal experience. But I understand, it's a very inspirational thing. And we thank you very much for your composition output. What's in the pipeline? I mean, has this lockdown increased the Mylechreest compositions? Has anyone phoned you up and said, that gives us a chance to do that solo we've been wanting you to write? What's in the pipeline?
So it's been an interesting time. For us, we were hit bad in New York. And so I think a large part of these last few weeks, I think there has been a period of grieving and just trying to work out what has been lost and what we're going to come through with. Like I said, there's been some good time to read some more books. I've been going through Ray Stedman Allen's. He has a great book on brass band instrumentation, which I've been going through that again.
The color
books
one.
on, yes,
I've got that somewhere.
Color and texture in the brass band score.
Yeah,
beautiful. Been reading through that one and a few jazz books. But for right now, I'm working on a couple of singing company pieces. Again, that's my day to day. Is I spend 4 or 5 days a week. We'll be going around to a different corps and teaching their young kids. And there's so much music out there. But if that's what I'm dealing with on a day to day, I find it easier to write for that sort of ensemble.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of upbeat songs, because that's something that there's so much beautiful slower music, and then the upbeat ones we kind of have a lacking of. So writing a few of those, going through a few old compositions and seeing if they can be updated or tweaked. And that's always dangerous, because if I'm not careful, I end up just spending all my time going back over the past as opposed to moving forward. So as far as brass bands, if somebody has something that they're interested in, or something they want to, please reach out. Now is a good time.
Don't tempt me. Don't tempt me. Favorite Salvation Army song? I know it's almost impossible these days, but Is there anything that you can remember even from growing up that has stuck with you?
Okay, Salvation Army songs. Well, again, it changes week by week, and that's been one of the amazing things of being called pianist. As honestly, it's not great, but I do my best. It means that I've been having a chance to go through some of these old songs that I recognize and coming over some of those. I mean, Bill's song, "All That I Am," is incredible.
Yep.
"Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus" is a real
one.
favorite of mine. Gowans, I mean, you can't go without saying how special Gowans and Larson really are. Their musical output, "You Know That I Love You" is a stunning song.
Yep.
And then obviously you then have something as cheesy as "Hundreds and Thousands," but is one that sticks in your head forever.
That's a glorious song.
Not cheesy. Special song. But those are the songs which stay here. And
absolutely.
I'm finding that when I'm wanting to teach kids, sometimes I don't have to bring out something brand new. Some of these older songs, the song that I've been doing recently with all of the singing companies has been "Hand Me Down My Silver Trumpet," the Joy Webb.
Wow, absolute classic.
But right, it's a classic, and I just thought, I'll try this out. The kids love it; they absolutely adore it. So again, this is where we go back to, as we are creating more music, we shouldn't forget about our past, and we have so much incredible stuff to look back on. We are blessed. I mean, as a movement.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I remember a few years ago, I think the session was Messengers of Light, and we went to a place you probably know very well, Central Hall, Westminster, for the commissioning, and they webcast the thing as they always do, and the very last song was "This Little Light of Mine," and they invited everyone to hold up their mobile phones and use torches. When the guy announced that they had a worship band that had been doing all the modern stuff, the wave of euphoria that swept over that congregation, and the people going, Monday, Tuesday, that gem of simplicity, Joy Webb, all these classic sing company songs, it comes down to what you've been stipulating: simplicity, straightforwardness, and that kind of easy to lock onto a tune that you don't have to have a PhD that rivals Mozart and Kenneth Downey. The kids, if they can get their teeth around it, they'll get the message, and it will lodge, as it has for us. And I think that's just absolutely fabulous to do. Favorite piece of band music? Do you have one?
The piece that got me into everything, I can specifically remember sitting and hearing Boscombe Band. We had just moved back to the country, and hearing them play through "Shine as the Light." That was a moment for me, which suddenly switched on something in my brain which said, "Wow, brass bands have a purpose and a message and are going to do something." So that was an incredible one for that time. Since then, I mean, there's so much. I'm sure everybody says "Just as I Am." It's a stunning piece. Romans 8.
Yes.
Romans 8 is another one which I was fortunate enough to lead a summer school in the UK, and we looked at that for during that week, and just the messages which are hidden in there. There's some amazing things, stunning music there, and again, there's so much amazing music. What's that?
It's interesting you say "Shine as a Light," because if I remember correctly, that was a tribute to Captain Al Honsberger in New York. So being in New York, does "Shine as a Light" have a special significance for the musicians in that area? Have you noticed that?
Oh, absolutely. When I first moved here, Gordon Ward was still our divisional music director, who for years and years was the youth band leader and principal cornet of the New York Staff Band. And there's so much history in New York of some amazing composers have come through there. The editorial department there over the years has been Dorothy Gates. We had Kevin Norbury. We had Eric Lydson. We had some amazing names which have been there, which suddenly when you bring out a march like Manhattan Citadel or Stephen Brothers, or I mean Star Lake, for instance. I play Star Lake every year because that's my camp. That's literally, I spend my summer at Star Lake, and it's incredible to be
I'm
part
drooling. I'm
just to be
drooling.
part of that history. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I remember Eric saying in his notes that, I think I said this previously, that I think it says in the notes that he had to write it simpler because even the prestigious cornet level players at Starlight couldn't play the music, and he had to sort of tone it down a bit. I thought Eric Bull was, he knew the people he was writing for. Yeah, I mean, you've got some wonderful music in New York. I mean, I think Peter wrote it when he was on the music ministries department in New York as a tribute. So
Yeah.
I think I remember the first time I heard it, it just knocked my socks off. Not just because of that wonderful cornet obligato line where he's resembling the things, but also the bells and the percussion.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a musical masterpiece. So,
Absolutely. And I think that piece particularly ushered in a whole new wave of composition, of music making for everybody post Shiners of the Light. I think it changed the game of how we approach our bigger pieces. And there have been some incredible things. I mean, I also remember Glorifica Aeternum for the first time hearing that.
I don't know who wrote that one. That's a
someone somewhere.
Yeah.
But again, that's so much amazing music which has touched my life. And so it's always great going back over some of these, and now being able to chat with some of these composers. Yeah, it's great.
It must have been a real privilege and a pleasure. So, I mean, you've obviously got your mentors who you've spoken about, and you've got Kenneth Downey and the American composer Steve Buller and that kind of thing. So, who to you are your musical giants that you enjoy their music when they come on the stands? If someone gets out a piece of music and you're just playing trombone, or you're doing whatever you're doing, you're not necessarily doing the conducting, you're using the back seat of the band, you're just a player, and right, we're going to dig this thing out. Who are the composers of the past, and you maybe still have, who just you enjoy listening to and playing as a bandsman?
Another great question. Dorothy Gates's music. I'm biased because she's local, but she's brilliant. Her music is she's another one which is simplicity is key, but it's always fantastic. But she's pushed herself on some amazing large scale works. Bill Hines stuff is always fantastic. I mean, any Ken Downey number, when it comes on the stand, it's going to be quality. The one for me, which is also as a mentor, I mean, obviously you've got Leslie Condon, Racer Man. There's so much. The one which I think who doesn't get enough love, I think would be Michael Kenyon.
Wow, interesting.
Who
yes.
I think he's that forgotten one.
Yes.
But every
Absolutely.
single piece of his that I've played has been top notch, and particularly his work for transcriptions and arrangements, which is something that I enjoy doing. I've enjoyed transcribing choral works or orchestral works. Every single one is perfectly balanced.
Yeah.
And I think he's one of those composers who just quietly sat back and was doing the job and doing it. But Michael Kenyon's music, I don't think I've ever played a wrong one.
Yeah, I think I think like composer comes to mind is Charles Dove, someone who just their everyday job, they got on with it, and they a bit like George Marshall, but not as mega as that. They had the ideas, they wrote them out, they had the commissions, they pumped it out, and they were just chugging along in the background, saying, Salvation Army, here's a piece based on Mendelssohn, here's a transcription.
Yeah.
If it's any good, I'm happy for it. And they trundle, and yet for some reason they get forgotten about. And we're not dismissing Michael Kenyon's amazing ability. I think Andrew Blythe has been quoted as saying he was a magnificent teacher and editor, and really had a very good sense of humor. Apparently, I never knew him. I can't speak from personal knowledge. So
I wish. I mean, Andrew Blythe is another name who he would never push himself to be this, but every single piece is well thought out and well written. So many of the great names that you've already been interviewed and know you'll be interviewing over the next little while. Like, there's so much.
I hope so.
It's great. I mean, Ian Feltwell, Dean Jones, Andrew Mackriff. He's another one who always fantastic.
I'd love to. Got to get hold of him.
Oh, we're so blessed to have so many people who write music, and not just for music's sake, but music with a message and music with a purpose. And I think those pieces really are the ones that come through and mean so much to so many people.
Yeah. Have you got a favourite Bible scripture that sort of get stuck on the kitchen door and the fridge magnet kind of thing?
Interesting.
Or what is it
At the
today as of, 6 o'clock
yeah,
tonight kind of thing?
at the moment, it would be trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. And one of the reasons I love that one, which is
Mum would love you on that
Psalm
one. That's her favourite verse.
somewhere. But part of the beauty of that one, and again, we come back to some of the music that we teach. There's a fairly recent singing company arrangement of that. Trust in the Lord with all. Who did that? That might have been Andrew Blythe, actually. Someone can fact check me later. But
Yep.
that one, when I teach it to kids, like not only are they learning beautiful melodies, they're also learning biblical scripture and biblical truths, which they might not even know that they're learning right now.
Yep.
But then later, when it comes down 5-10 years down the track, knowing in the back of your head those songs, it's beautiful. And I think there's something really special about those songs, which are scripturally based.
Yeah.
when we teach.
When you can go back and use the scripture as the inspiration, it really puts the message in the heart and makes people remember. And I think a lot of singing company songs that I sang are very memorable. I had one the other day that came to mind, and I'll name check Suzanne Rose, who's very kindly agreed to Just the Same by Kevin Norbury. I have not heard that in probably since I sang it in the sing company. Have you ever heard the story of the baby Bethlehem? She's agreed to hopefully record the vocal version. And I tell you what, when that comes up, when she has the time to do it, and that's absolutely fine, absolute blessing. So I'm going to let you get on with your life because I've got to get on with mine in this one. But thank you so much for taking the time out and talking music, inspirations, and just being there and being so helpful and cooperative and chatty. It's been a real blessing to share time and knowledge and music and to see the differences from a British chap in America and that wonderful kind of historical vintage and that cultural difference, because it does happen. It does have an impact on your music. So thank you very much for being part of this weird, crazy chat symposium collection, whatever you want to call it.
More than this has been fantastic. Really, thank you so much. And to all of the other talented composers who are out there, it's such a pleasure to be amongst your midst. It's always a real privilege when you end up putting your name in. You see it in the top right corner somewhere. But no, it's been a great journey. It's one I'm still growing in, still learning on. And I'm so thankful to all of the amazing bandmasters and players and people who've sat next to me along the way and have encouraged and taught me along the way. But more than this is such a great opportunity to chat with you and to hear some other perspectives. So thank you for doing this.
What I'll do now, I'll say a short prayer for those watching and for yourself, sir. If you want to stay open or closed, I leave the choice entirely up to you. Heavenly Father, Edward is a truly dedicated servant and following your will for his life. A difficult transition from all over the world to New York, Lord. An officer's kid, he understands cultural differences, and we thank you that he is still listening keenly for your voice in his life as he travels musically, compositionally, arranging, and for all the people that he comes into contact with through his work, through his life, through his ministry, and for those who will be profoundly affected by his ministry. We pray that he keeps that in the center of his heart and he keeps you in the center as he so obviously does, Lord. And we thank you for the music of Edward, that he knows where he's going, and he knows that if there's a problem, you are there, and that there are so many talented people around who are so happy and willing to encourage, as they themselves, when they were starting out, had the encouragement and that devotion to duty. So I pray for Edward and his family. I pray for Valley's mum and dad in England, and that they will continue to be blessed by the ministry, that being in the Salvation Army and being miles apart does not mean that we can't be close to each other in thought and prayer, and that I know the love is there. And it's a privilege to know Val, but it's also a privilege to know Edward. We come from the same hospital ward, and Heathrow Hospital, it's a unique fact that sometimes doesn't spring up. But for the ministry, the music, the mayhem, the joy and the laughter, and those wonderful inspirational moments that he experiences in his journey with the kids, with the scene companies, with his job description, with the people he is privileged to share a life with. I pray your blessing on him, Lord, that he will continue to hear your voice clearly when he needs it, and know that encouragement of Jesus Christ in his heart. Amen.
Thanks, Marvin.
Right, I will switch to the record.